So hello, good morning. This is the KubeBuilder and controller runtime and controller tools as well. I don't know why controller tools is not on this list. Meeting for January 8th in 2020, start of the decade. As a reminder, this is being recorded and posted to YouTube publicly, so do not say anything that you would not want recorded for all time for your children to hear, or for grandparents or other people. All right, so there's only one thing on the meeting agenda for today that I can see so far, and it's the ongoing plugins debate. So if anybody has anything else before that, it's probably a good idea to talk about that briefly if it's quick, and then we can move on to that.
I will bring up something that I bring up at a lot of these, which is, has there been any discussion of bumping to Kube 117 dependencies?
I think, so at least for controller tools, I think there was a bump. I think it's just a matter of submitting the PR.
Okay. Cool.
Great. Anyone else have anything they'd like to talk about briefly before we jump into ongoing discussion about the proposal for plugins and the CLI package and whatnot? All right. So basically, I just wanted to take some time and see if maybe we can, we've been going back and forth, and I think there's a few avenues of different ideas that have been thrown out and a few avenues of discussion, and I want to see if we can kind of maybe talk about it a little bit and unify them a bit and maybe get a more concrete path forward. All right, so I'm happy to start. Or if Joe, if you have anything you wanted to throw in, since I think you submitted the PR. Either works.
Yeah, so I guess I can talk a little bit. Eric might have more to add. Eric has been helping too. My impression is I think we have like at least a base set of agreed things. Like we want to have a name and a version. It seems like we are okay with the proposed like interfaces for what a plugin would look like in terms of the basically to support the having nice help, and also like having like the run thing that the Cobra can use under the hood. So we'll have like this dynamic CLI that detects things based on the project file or a flag and can use the interface implementation to run whatever plugin code the plugin defines. It seems like we're all good there. It seems like the thing that and you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, it seems like the thing that there's still debate about is like, how do we layer different plugins? Do we want to be able to support more than one like root plugin at a time? Do we want to be able to pipe plugin input to output? And then if the answer to that is yes immediately right now, then it seems like there's going to be a lot of debate about how do we manage the configuration for those and what the compatibility between different plugins is. So those seem like the big questions.
Yeah, it seemed like there was also some like minor questions about like that for the interfaces, do we want to have like here is this plugin, it has a different interface for each command, or do we want to let plugins say like, tell me the command that's being run and I will tell you whether or not I want to work with it, or like, here's my list of sub commands that I support. That seemed like it seemed like it was another open question. I did another read through yesterday and tried to work through the current state. So that was one of the other things I wanted to maybe see if we could hammer out today.
Yeah, that's a good point. Obviously, you could probably tell by my proposal that I think I prefer the like explicit interface definitions, and driving like the CLI knows about all of the interfaces and can explicitly run them, rather than the CLI discovering itself via the plugins, which seems messy, I guess.
Okay. So I think I will give my opinion on the first question you brought up, and then that maybe influences the opinion on this one. So I think probably for the sake of like actually getting something done, we should come up with a solution that will allow us to expand into piping, but like not tackle it now. Because I think I will say I was initially hopeful that we could do them both together, but I think practically it's making this more complicated, and so I think we should like think about in a very hand wavy way, like if we did this, how would we then introduce that?
Yeah.
And then like be like, okay, as long as we're not painted into a corner, so that like in a month or two or whatever, when we decide to introduce the piping or whatever, we don't go like, oh shoot, that
right.
There's just no way to do this. So I think that's the case.
I agree with that approach. That seems like a reasonable way forward. It frees us up to not have to think about the more complicated piping plugin scenario, but it also, like, we do need to at least consider that when we're coming up with the current set of designs and implementations.
So for the second question, the thing I'm kind of split between the two, between the explicit interfaces versus the like ask the plugin, does it support this series of subcommands? I would lean slightly towards ask the plugin, does it support this series of subcommands? Simply because, like, from a type perspective, I like the explicit interfaces, but from a like in the future, if we want to allow things like, on all create commands or all commands that generate, Go code, which just might be like, let me see all commands that are being run because I want to add something in. Like, I want to add Docker ignore files, or I want to add Bazel build files, or I want to, like stuff like that. That might be /probably is easier with the like asking the plugin. But I don't know if like it's compellingly enough easier to motivate not doing these bases.
So I guess maybe you could probably help me understand a little more. So the proposal and the POC code that exists right now, basically it is asking the plugin. It's basically saying, hey plugin, do you implement this interface? If so, go ahead and do your stuff. If not, then you don't implement the interface. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. So is there a way maybe to do a hybrid approach where it's still like an explicit interface that has explicit commands, but maybe it's more extensible to like not being so embedded with building the CLI out? Maybe that's the one area where there's some debate.
I mean, it was mainly just that, like, with a plugin system like that, if you wanted to say run me on every command, you have to just like copy and paste your interface implementation for
Gotcha.
every command that you want to be run on, which is like not terrible, but kind of annoying, right? Like, whereas
yeah, somebody's gonna end up code genning that, and then we're gonna go back to like pre controller runtime days. Like, I don't think we want. Like this thing was made, so we didn't do that. So we should.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible to do a hybrid approach too. Like, we could have the explicit interfaces and then like a special wildcard interface where if you implement the wildcard interface, we will like ask you, right? Like, you can either say, you know, run create API, or you can say, you can implement like, do you want to run subcommand, and then like a slice of strings for the subcommand. And then if you implement do you want to run, then you get asked if you want to run. If you implement create API, you always get run on create API.
Do you think, so the one problem I could see with that is, like, is there a way that we could still incorporate that plugin's flags, help, examples, etc., into the help output? Or would this be like a totally, like, you don't see anything about this plugin on the help output and it just runs at runtime?
So I've been playing around with that. I was playing around last night. I haven't figured out a way to do it with Cobra, but I figured out a way to do it. I figured out a way to do it not with Cobra in a way that still supports Cobra subcommands, I think.
Cool.
But the other thing that I wanted to bring up is I was playing around with your example, and I don't know if like I messed something up when I was playing around with it, but it didn't, like, that initial pass on the flag parse didn't seem to quite apply properly. Like, it wasn't behaving like it was not doing what it looked like it was supposed to do, like the hack where we try to parse the initial flags to see what plugins we want, and then we
right. Yeah, there might be a bug in there.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if, like, I was wondering if we needed to, it's unclear to me if we're going to need to do some things to work around Cobra anyway with that. Cause like, that I'm not sure how nicely Cobra is going to want to deal with stuff like that.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought about with this, so in SDK, we've started, and this is maybe a really minor detail that we could probably work around, but one thing we've started doing in SDK is automatically generating help markdown files based on Cobra. Like, Cobra can just spit those out. But if we're doing this dynamic discovery of setting up the Cobra commands based on files that exist and flags that exist, like, you can't possibly come up with the full help for everything that's supported by the CLI. So that's a minor problem that would be interesting to solve as well.
I mean, I think you actually, I think you can, if you just basically say, like, you have a prepare phase where basically every plugin gets to declare like a modifications to the help and stuff like that. And then I think you could probably just loop through the plugins and then loop through each of the commands, because it's still a fixed, even though we're like asking the plugin what it wants to do with a given subcommand, we still have a fixed set of subcommands, right? We're not saying we're accepting arbitrary, like, you can't be like, you could be like, I accept create turtles, but we're never going to ask you. We're never going to call you with create turtles, because when you type create turtles on the command line, it's going to be like, that's not a thing.
Right. But let me think. I think the problem I'm thinking of, and maybe you've already figured out a solution to this, but the problem I'm thinking of is, like, if you say kubectl create, or actually kubectl init, or KubeBuilder init, depending on what project version flag, you tell it, you're going to get a totally separate help output. So I guess what you're saying is we just iterate over all the plugins, regardless of whatever flag project version is. We're not doing that as far as generating the docs, and we'll just generate one init help doc per project version or plugin version.
Basically, I think you have to, right? Like you kind of, because like the help for, create API with project type Helm is completely different, presumably from, so like you kind of have to have like man KubeBuilder init dash Helm and man KubeBuilder init dash go.
Right. Anyway, that's not probably a major concern of the proposal, but something I've been considering out. We're doing that in SDK for our existing CLI.
No, that's a useful thing to do, and I like the idea. I think it would be cool. We should probably, like, this is like eventually, unless like you have someone on your team that like is really bored and wants to do this right now. I would love to do something like that as part of the docs build pass, and then just slurp it into the reference section in the book. So how like we have like references, markers, and we have like controller tools just spits out all the markers it knows, and then we turn that into HTML. I would love to like, same thing for KubeBuilder. I was not aware that, I don't think I was aware that Cobra did that for you. So like, if we could take advantage of that, it would be really cool.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
We'll put it in the backlog.
Or if anybody's on the call that's new and like wants an interesting way to jump in, that's definitely like would be super appreciated. Okay.
And so just a quick note on what you're talking about. So I implemented the plugin system as is in the proposal for KubeBuilder. I posted that branch in my most recent comment on the PR. So if you want to take a look at that and play around with it, the CLI has not been set up yet. I will do that fairly soon. But yeah, if you want to take a look at how that would be implemented.
I completely missed that comment and was, I think, looking at a different one.
Okay.
I'll take a look at that. I was looking at the KubeBuilder Exp.
That was the original one I put together.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that, and I can post like the stuff that I was playing around with. The TLDR is that before we went on break, I got really frustrated with the fact that none of the flag libraries like let you just parse the flags and like not do anything with them. And so like I wrote like just like a thing for scanning and parsing out like command lines. So for some of the stuff where we have to hack around Cobra to like do an initial pass before, like do an initial pass to like figure out what the plugins flag is set to, I think we should be able to use that. And in fact, like I have a working prototype of like doing an initial pass with that, that I will post somewhere.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. If you could do that.
I called it CLY. As in, why do we need another one of these?
Because we always do.
It's true.
But we never do. One thing that came up that I noticed when implementing this system is that if you have a generic interface and you're trying to implement the generic interface for like, init and create on some struct that configures a plugin, then you might have conflicting method names. Like you can't obviously override a method with the same signature, or even without the same signature, just the same name and go. So if you don't have like create init plugin and create API plugin, for example, and instead you have two versions of create plugin, then that won't work for a generic interface, but it will if you have different method names for, like Joe suggested, hard-coded interface names. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought about that a little bit. I think that I'm not sure that's too terrible, because it just encourages you to split out things into like two separate structs in some cases, which I think may be acceptable. Like I split out from the KubeBuilder X, I split out the init plugin and the create, or the init plugin and the create plugin into two separate like structs that just got like delegated to from the main one. And it wasn't bad. Like it was like, it ended up being like run if it's running. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I think I figured out, this was something I made a comment on.
Sorry, operating on 4 hours of sleep. Takes a bit for the progress bar to load to sufficient.
Yeah, I don't know if my explanation was very succinct either. So, Joe, what were you saying?
I think I addressed this in one of the comments in the PR. Let me put it in the chat. Where is my chat?
Hey, can you give me like 1 or 2 minutes? I need to go grab my charger because my laptop's about to die and it's in the other room.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, be back in like 1.
So for those who are here, in the bottom of that comment I just linked, I ended up coming up with, like, I think we probably need the same sort of thing that Sully was just talking about, where there's a separate implementation for each of the CLI subcommands. So this basically introduces like this separate layer of like an init plugin getter, a create plugin getter, and then you can define a struct that implements init plugin and create plugin, and those could be separate structs.
Yeah, I like this implementation because we only have one generic subcommand interface that you can just embed in any like plugin interface, and then you can also add specific methods on top of that. So it gives like a very similar feel, like you said, to the generic subcommand interface, while still allowing for type checking, which is really nice to have. Like you don't have to ask the plugin anything. It's just done through the type system.
The other thing that I wanted to ask about, actually, this you've reminded me, is do we want to have like stuff like description and examples be methods that get called, or do we want to allow passing in like the default description? So this is like a hypothetical, which means it's probably not too important, but I can imagine plugins where you don't actually want to come up with a completely new description. You just want to add an additional line, or like you might not want to override the description, but you want to add additional examples because you added new flags. And so like being able to say like, here's the current description, I get to set this field or add to it or whatever, might be useful, but I'm not sure how important that is. I mean, sorry.
Finish up. Well, yeah. So what, you would just have like a descriptioner and an exemplar interface, something like that?
I think basically you just have like you'd have a like configured description method, and it would get past a struct that was like a pointer to a struct that was like description examples, and then like the configured description would be responsible for changing that if it wanted to set the description to something else or modify it.
Okay, right.
I think
and then the calling code would then just pull out after calling it via the plug. After calling that method with the plugin, it would take whatever was there and make that the Cobra description example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This is like not so important for base plugins, I think, but like for if slash when we eventually have like the filter plugins, it might be nice to be able to be like, oh, here's just an additional example that just uses this new flag I added, because it's not a replacement. It's just like I added an extra flag that turns on some new functionality kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, I think that would be useful because, in a lot of cases, yeah, you don't really need to override the description. It's fine just having a generic one.
Okay. I think that was most of what I wanted to talk about. Oh, I don't know if this has changed since you're in the Eric's version versus the KubeBuilder X version, but I noticed in the KubeBuilder X version, individual plugins were entirely responsible for flags. Like there were no built-in flags. I didn't know if that was intentional. Like it seems to me like some flags you probably want to be like, every create API command probably wants kind and resource and stuff like that. And so like those should be common flags, but I wanted to hear if that was.
So that's actually a perfect use case. Like if we did a create API with the Helm plugin, one of the modes that right now we're supporting is basically downloading the Helm chart and basically auto discovering what the API version and kind is. And we have like a default, like the kind is basically the name of the chart. The API version would be defaulted to something potentially, just to make it like super easy for someone who has a Helm chart to come in and create an API for it and convert it from a Helm chart into a operator.
Is that the only mode of the Helm one, or is that just
you can? Okay. That's true. So you can still also explicitly define like, no, use this GVK instead. But yeah. I guess what I'm saying is, at the very least, it seems like that would be an optional thing.
Yeah, you would want to provide like you would want to define the flags, but not mark any of them as required, basically.
Yeah.
That also helps keep the UX like similar between plugins.
Right, that's true.
So that we don't accidentally end up with two flags that do the same thing. But
depending on which plugin you're using, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. So the way that the interface works right now is you're basically delegating to the plugin, which gets to define its own struct to populate the flags from.
Mm-hmm.
I guess would we basically tell like document that plugin should embed like a default flag struct in their flag struct to be able to basically inherit the base flags? Is that how you would do it, or is there a better way that I'm not thinking of?
I think there's like a few ways that I can think of on the range from like kind of simple to exceedingly idiotically clever, like in a why did you do this works, but why did you do this sort of way. So like that's one method that you just suggested. Another method would be to pass in a context and basically allow like things to ask the context for previously declared configuration. So you could be like, context.give me all the context from the create API command, and in like you pass it in the struct, it would populate the structs out of the context. And then another one would be reflection to like dynamically just figure out how things mapped in your struct. Like you could specify additional things that would be from the base, and it would reflect over to set them. Which is clever, but I think overly clever.
Did you not simply just add the like flags to the flag set before passing it to bind flags?
Yeah, you could also ask people to call lookup on the flag names.
Yeah.
That is another way.
That's kind of hidden. It
That's
seems like it'd be nicer if it were more apparent.
exactly. And it's like weirdly like untype safe. You have to know what type the flag is in order to cast the value, and like
I like the context idea. That seems like that also then supports the like extension of having like multiple plugins piped together, because the context might expand as plugins are running. Maybe one plugin could add something to the context to inform the next plugin of something that it did or something like that.
Mm-hmm. I was playing around with this actually in my local fork last night, and it seemed to work decently well. It's kind of the pattern for context, right? You have some series of things before you in the chain that add data to the chain, but you don't like necessarily know exactly what, so you pull it out of the.
It's like an HTTP middleware.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Okay. We can look at plumbing that. Do you want me to set up a feature branch for us to collaborate on in the main KubeBuilder repo?
Yeah, that'd be great.
And then people can just open PRs against that, and we can debate the code, and we can merge it, and then when we're ready, we can merge the feature branch. Right?
Yeah, and I think that would be good to do in parallel with the proposal, just because it'll give people an idea, a better sense of challenges during implementation and things that we need to work out. But obviously, we wouldn't merge it until we're finished with the proposal.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be helpful for sure. That way we're just not passing around links to our own repos and branches.
Yeah, it's never fun. So just to quickly go back to Joe's suggestion, he just posted it in the chat when you were gone, Sully. Did you get a chance to take a look at that with his generic subcommand suggestion, everything?
Sorry, say that again?
In the chat, there's a link to Joe's comment that suggests using hybrid generic, non-generic plugin system or interface system.
Oh, yeah. Was that the one where with the extra embedded thing? I think it may have been because it was like 11 p.m., but I was having a hard time following the exact details of what he was suggesting. But I think I get the general gist.
Yeah, so this was, so the idea that I had, I think there was some discussion about like, basically the discussion we were just having where like we're basically re-implementing the exact same interface for 3 different plugins. And the way that the current proposal says is it's basically like you're implementing like 12 different methods with different method names, even though basically you're duplicating those same methods for each plugin type, like for init versus create API versus create webhook. So based on some of the discussion there, it seemed like, okay, like that makes total sense. Really, there's just one interface that we're talking about, which is this generic subcommand interface. But we still want to have like potentially different implementations for init, create API, and create webhook.
Yes, I see what's going on
this
here.
extra layer in between that you can get the implementation, and it's still basically all implementing the same interface.
I see what's going on here. Yeah, that makes more sense now. Right. Right.
And then I think, Sully, that kind of aligns with how you were splitting out the init struct from the create struct.
Yeah.
Which makes sense to me.
I pasted a link to the new branch in the thread. So you can feel free to open PRs against that. And we can just merge those semi-aggressively if we want.
Sounds good. Thank you. I like the name.
You gotta have some fun with your names.
Very true.
All right. Was anybody taking notes? No.
No.
Okay. Well, we have a recording.
Yeah.
And if anybody that has gotten more than 4 hours of sleep would like to remembers like what we said in more detail and wants to jot that down, that would be most appreciated. Otherwise, I will maybe go over the recording a little bit later and try to jot stuff down, or at least jot stuff down from memory, or we can add stuff into the PR.
I will do that.
Okay.
Following this, and then I will be updating the PR based on what we talked about. So I guess, yeah, going forward from this, it would be nice to like get some affirmative or non-affirmative answers on how we want the interfaces to look like, just because that's like that's the meat of this proposal. So does that, like, I guess we should take a little bit more time after this meeting to like really think about Joe's suggestion and whether we want something generic. But also, does that, like, from a cursory glance, look good to you and to everybody else who's been commenting on this PR that's in this meeting?
I think I might tweak one of the names slightly, but other than that, like, I think it looks pretty good at a cursory glance. One of the things we can do is we can write it down in the proposal, and we can start collaborating on the feature branch, and then like we can say this is tentatively accepted in the proposal, and then like if we have to change it because it turns out that like on the feature branch everything is terrible or something, which I don't expect it will, but you never know. Like every once in a while you're like, darn, this just completely doesn't work. Yeah. Then we can always go back and change it.
Okay, great. So I will update the proposal and then update what I have in my feature branch, then make a PR to the branch that you just made.
Cool. Awesome. And yeah, I will try to remember to post the CLY stuff so that we can make use of that for some of our tricks.
Excellent.
All right. Does anyone have anything else they would like to discuss? All right. That sounds like a no. So I will see y'all in a month.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Happy New Year.
Thanks.
Happy New Year.